Unfalsifiable claims, and this is going to be part, I don't know, of anybody's guess, because we see these sorts of claims all the time, and if I see one, I'm going to jump on it. This particular one relates to this tweet from Tim Sledge, and he says, "We are praying for you." Translation: if you don't get COVID-19, we'll claim God shielded. If you do get it but recover, we'll claim God healed. If you die, we'll explain that God had a reason. The same results are possible by praying to a telephone pole. This is exactly what we mean by an unfalsifiable proposition. You think of an experiment, like the global pandemic that's going on at the moment, and whatever the outcome, you claim that it was because of God. When theists make claims that God is in control, they are often in the business of setting up unfalsifiable propositions. Let's use as an example a boy walking along a street when there's a drive-by shooting. Scenario 1. All of the bullets missed the boy. Thank God. Scenario 2. He gets a flesh wound. He'll be alright in a couple of weeks. Thank God. Scenario 3. The boy is hospitalized, but thanks to the skill of surgeons and the care of nurses, he regains full health. Thanks to the skill of surgeons? Of course not. Thank God. Scenario 4. The boy ends up permanently disabled. Thank God. I mean, after all, it could have been worse. Scenario 5. The boy is killed. Thank God. I mean, he's in a better place now. And thankfully, not everybody else on the street was killed. It was just that boy. There's a shooting at a church, or synagogue, or shopping mall. You get the picture. Scenario 1. Nobody gets killed. Thank God. Scenario 2. Less than 10 people are killed. And we roll on. The scenarios can come and come and come. And whatever the outcome, we thank God, because it could always have been worse. And if everybody gets killed, well, they're in a better place now. It was God's will. So there's no way to actually test whether God is actually involved or not. Perhaps, though, we could set up an actual test. And I warn you, there's math in the next bit. So here's a question that I pinched straight from a UK A-level paper. Hopefully, I'm not going to get done for copyright. So what does it say? David claims that the weather forecasts produced by a local radio are no better than those achieved by tossing a fair coin and predicting rain if a head is obtained, or no rain if a tail is obtained. He records the weather for 30 randomly selected days. The local radio forecast is correct on 21 of these days. Now, clearly they've done better than 50-50, but while it's expected that you get 15 and 15 if you toss a fair coin, if you actually do that experiment a few times, you'll find that your results vary quite a bit. So the question is 21 significant? So we're going to test David's claim at the 5% level of significance, and we'll see what that means shortly. And we need to state our hypotheses clearly, something people who make unfalsifiable propositions never do. So let's see how we could investigate David's claim with the information given. We're going to let x be the random variable, the number of days the forecast is correct. Now clearly, if he records the weather for 30 randomly selected days, x could take any value from 0, they never ever get it correct, to 30, they get it correct every single time. But of course the probabilities of each of those numbers will change. For those who are interested and don't know, a random variable It's variable because it can take the different values from 0 to 30. And it's random because if you actually get a coin and toss it 30 times and you do that lots of times, you'll get different results on a number of occasions. So from this type of situation, we can say that we have a binomial distribution. We have a fixed number of trials, 30, and a constant probability of success, which we call P here. And that's because P is the actual parameter. Now, because he's saying it's a coin, P is actually a half, but we don't put a half in here. We always say P, because our null hypothesis, that's the situation of no change, or the situation of David's claim, is that that P is equal to a half. And then you have to have an alternative hypothesis, which in this case is P is greater than a half, because he's testing whether they literally get a 50-50 chance against whether they do better than that. Now, we said that we were going to test this at the 5% level of significance, or a probability of 0.05. Now, the typical thing with this type of testing is that you set up something called a critical region. So we've got a number line here going from 0 to 30, and somewhere up here there'll be a value R. That value R is called the critical value, and anything above it is the critical region. If our result lands in the critical region, then what we're going to do is reject H0 and say that we have evidence from this particular trial that David is incorrect. So, if we look up tables, we're going to find that the probability of x is greater than or equal to r, given that H0 is true, in other words, given that the probability is a half, we want to find whereabouts that is less than 0.05 or 5%. And from tables, we can find that the probability that x is greater than or equal to 20 is 0.0494. So in other words, this value r is actually 20. And therefore, x is 21 is in the critical region and is significant. This would be considered evidence to suggest, at this level of significance, that David's claim is not correct. Now, this was a very simple hypothesis test, but there are many, many types of hypothesis testing which people use in all sorts of research. For example, medical research. Let's suppose a new drug comes along and we'd like to replace an existing drug with that drug. You could do this type of testing. You'd want it at a considerably greater level of significance because it's probably going to cost a lot of money in order to replace one drug with another throughout a health service system. But the big question here is, instead of giving us an unfalsifiable statement, give us a test to see if your God is involved. And I think that the current global pandemic could give us exactly that sort of test, if we can set it up. If only we could have set it up in advance, it would have been so much better. But let's look at some of the batshittery that's about at the moment. So, what we have here is a picture of the Western Wall. People are still posting their letters. Look at the guy who's collecting them. He obviously doesn't think that God's going to protect him from that, but perhaps they should just stop doing it during this time. They're virus-covered letters, sticking them in the wall. We've all seen the pictures of mass gatherings at the Western Wall, for goodness sake. And of course, we've all seen this sort of stuff. The Florida megachurch pastor arrested for breaching COVID-19 health order. Yeah, it's a really good idea to get a lot of people together in a small space, because after all, God's looking after you. This guy, I believe, is the one who said that we're not pussies, and he got his congregants to shake hands and, hug each other and all this sort of stuff. Of course, God's protecting them, the virus won't spread there. And there's another one, and I think if we just looked, we could find lots and lots and lots and lots of them, and they wouldn't all be Christians either. Didn't work out so well for this guy. So, Now, other types of batshittery. This guy says it's caused by Jews spreading the coronavirus in synagogues. Well, as far as I was aware, synagogues were closed quite early during this whole thing to stop the spread. And of course, we've had people saying that it's an atheist virus. I've also seen Jews actually saying that it was originally Christians who infected the Western Wall, which is why a few people got infected there. And perhaps all these religious folks should go away and decide who actually is responsible before they come after those of us that don't believe in their gods. But, and we must never forget this, prayer works. Although, if we set up a hypothesis test that was based on this graph, maybe not so much. So what I want to know is, amongst all of this, could we actually set up a hypothesis test to test whether or not, God is involved, or he's going to protect his faithful, or whatever? Well, if only we'd known about this pandemic earlier, we could have set up a situation like this. So we could have segregated out people who are prepared to take on expert recommendations, and not all of these people are non-believers. There's lots and lots of religious folk out there who believe in their God, but will take on board the recommendations of actual experts and do things like social distancing and regular hand washing and going shopping less frequently, and only going for essentials, food and stuff like that. And then we could segregate out, the evangelical Christians of the type seen on the previous page. Let them all get together and, shake hands and hug each other and all the rest of it, go into these mass congregations. There was even one guy who said he wanted a Woodstock-like event. Yep, great, but just don't let them come out into society and mingle with the rest of us. That's absolutely fine. And let's put some numbers on it and see where the critical region is. And we could do the same sort of thing with Orthodox Jews who are gathering at the Western Wall, though they can't do that now. There's actually barriers and things to stop them getting too close together. And other idiots, including some non-believers who just won't follow expert advice. Let's divide all these groups up, set up a hypothesis test, and let's see just how much God is involved and how much he will protect those who truly believe.